I have been insulted in many ways in my life, but never in French. Not by a man who thought I was too poor to understand him and too insignificant to matter. That was the night a wealthy stranger tried to humiliate me in front of his date, without realizing I had spent 22 years teaching French literature at a university he could never afford to enter. And by the time dessert arrived, he was the one wishing the floor would swallow him whole. The restaurant smelled of butter, wine, and money. You could always tell the difference between a place that served food and a place that served status. This was the second kind. Crystal glasses caught the light like diamonds. Soft piano music floated through the air. Conversations stayed low, careful, polite, the way wealthy people speak when they don't want to disturb the illusion of refinement. I moved quietly between tables, balancing a silver tray in hands that had once held chalk, old books, and lecture notes. Now they held plates. My name is Dr. Elijah Brooks. I am 60 years old. And tonight, like every night for the past 3 years, I was a waiter in one of Manhattan's most expensive French restaurants. My shoes were polished but old. My back ached from standing 12 hours. My manager had already reminded me twice to smile more, because, according to him, guests like cheerful staff. I nodded, as I always did. Dignity doesn't always shout. Sometimes it survives by staying quiet. At 8:17 p.m., the front doors opened and the mood of the room shifted, the way it does when someone important arrives. He walked in like he owned the air. Expensive tailored suit, gold watch, loud confidence. The kind of man who measures his worth by how many people notice him. Beside him was a woman in a red dress, elegant but reserved, clearly on a date meant to impress her. The host rushed to greet them. My manager whispered in my ear, "VIP table, you take it and be careful." I approached their table with the practiced calm of someone invisible. "Good evening, sir. Welcome." He didn't look at me at first. He was too busy explaining to the woman how hard it was to find decent places to eat in this city anymore. Then his eyes dropped to my shoes. He smirked. "You've been working here long?" he asked, not kindly. "Yes, sir." He said, leaning back. "You look like you've been standing your whole life." The woman gave a small, uncomfortable smile. I kept my expression neutral. "May I bring you the wine list?" He chuckled. "Do you even understand what's on it?" I handed them the menu. He didn't thank me. As I stepped away, I heard him say quietly to her, "These people hire anyone these days." When I returned to take their order, he tapped the menu impatiently. "What wine would you recommend?" he asked, tone sharp, testing. I suggested a Bordeaux, calm and precise. He raised an eyebrow. "You know that word?" Then he turned to the woman and switched languages. Fast, arrogant, confident, French. He began speaking about me as if I wasn't standing there. These people memorize a few words to sound confident, but you can tell by the posture, by the hands, service class, always service class. The woman's eyes flicked toward me nervously. He continued, enjoying himself now. "I bet he doesn't understand a single word I'm saying. Watch this." He laughed softly. And that was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger, not humiliation, recognition. I had not heard French spoken like that, careless, showy, undisciplined, in a very long time. I looked at him carefully for the first time, and then, very gently, I placed the wine list on the table. Because he had made one fatal mistake. He assumed I was just a waiter.
He was still smiling when I returned with their water. Still relaxed, still amused with himself, still convinced I was invisible. He leaned closer to his date and continued speaking in French, lowering his voice just enough to feel clever, but not enough to escape my hearing. "These people never know," he said. "You can say anything. They just nod like trained pets." The woman shifted in her seat. She wasn't enjoying this anymore. I placed the glasses down gently. Ice clinked. Silence hovered. Then I spoke, in French. Clear, calm, perfect. "Sir, would you prefer the Bordeaux at cellar temperature or slightly chilled? The 2012 harvest is excellent, but the 2015 has a deeper finish if you enjoy something more expressive." The words didn't just land, they shattered. His smile froze mid-breath. The color drained from his face so quickly it was almost artistic. The woman's eyes widened. For a full 3 seconds, no one moved. He stared at me like I had just performed a magic trick he couldn't explain. You speak French?" he asked, now in English. I tilted my head slightly. "I taught French literature for 22 years, sir, at Columbia University." The silence at the table grew heavy. Not awkward, punishing. The woman slowly leaned back in her chair, studying him now instead of me. And for the first time since he walked into the restaurant, he looked small, very small. He cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Well, that's impressive," he muttered. But confidence, once cracked, never sounds the same. I nodded politely. "Shall I give you a moment to choose your wine?" He didn't answer, because now every word he had said was echoing back at him in a language he could no longer hide behind. I stepped away, leaving them in a silence he had created. From across the room, I could see the shift. He was no longer relaxed. His shoulders were tight, his movements stiff. The woman wasn't smiling anymore. She was watching him with a different expression, now the kind people have when they discover someone is not who they pretended to be. When I returned with the wine, he didn't make eye contact. I poured slowly, professionally. He tried to speak casually. "So what made you leave teaching?" I met his eyes calmly. "My wife passed away. Medical bills don't care about degrees." That landed harder than anything else, because it wasn't said with bitterness. It was said with truth. He nodded awkwardly. "I see." No jokes now, no smirks, no French. Just a man realizing he had mocked someone whose life he couldn't begin to understand. They ate quietly after that, very quietly. But something interesting happened. The woman began asking me questions, in English, respectfully. "How long did you teach? What authors did you love most? Did you ever go to Paris?" And I answered each one gently, briefly, without pride, because dignity never needs to raise its voice. He barely touched his food. By dessert, the roles at the table had completely reversed. She was engaged in conversation with me, and he was the one sitting there, wishing he could disappear. When I brought the check, he reached for it quickly, like a man trying to end a bad memory. But before he signed it, he looked up at me. His voice was different now, softer, careful. "I owe you an apology." I shook my head slightly. "No, sir, you owe yourself a lesson." And that was when I saw it, the realization. Not that he had embarrassed me, but that he had exposed himself. And there is nothing more uncomfortable than seeing yourself clearly for the first time. He signed the receipt without another word, but as they stood to leave, the woman did something unexpected. She stayed behind for half a second, looked at me, and said quietly, "Thank you." Not for the service, for the truth.
I didn't look at the receipt right away. I never do. Dignity means you treat every table the same, whether they leave $5 or $50. I cleared their plates calmly, wiped the table slowly, and carried the small leather folder back to the service counter. Only then did I open it, and for the first time in a long while, my hands paused. The total bill was $186. The tip was $1,000. Not written in numbers, written in words. "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long moment, not because of the money, but because of what it meant. This wasn't generosity. This was guilt, and guilt is the most expensive thing a person can feel. My coworker Luis leaned over my shoulder. "You okay, Walter?" I nodded and closed the folder. "Yes, I think someone just learned something tonight." Luis laughed softly. "About wine?" I shook my head. "About people." I slipped the receipt into my pocket instead of the register, not to hide it, but to keep it. Some lessons are worth remembering. As I stepped back onto the floor, I noticed the woman still standing near the entrance, pretending to check her phone. The man was outside, pacing near the curb like someone trying to outrun his own thoughts. She looked up when she saw me. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Why didn't you humiliate him when you had the chance?" I smiled faintly. "Because I wasn't trying to win." She studied my face carefully. "You could have embarrassed him in front of everyone." "Yes," I said gently, "but then I would have become the kind of person he thought I was." That stayed with her. I could see it. Some words don't need volume to be powerful. She nodded slowly. "You taught more tonight than he ever learned in school." Then she walked out. I watched through the window as she spoke to him near the car. He tried to explain something with big hand gestures, but she wasn't listening anymore. She got into the passenger seat without looking at him, and for the first time since they arrived, he looked unsure of himself, very unsure. They drove away in silence. I went back to work, because life doesn't pause for moments like this. But something inside me felt lighter. Not proud, not victorious, just seen. An hour later, my manager called me into his office. He was holding the receipt. "Walter, what happened at table 12? I sighed softly. "Just dinner and a lesson in manners." He raised an eyebrow. "The man called after he left." That surprised me. "What did he say?" "He asked if you really taught at Columbia." I nodded. My manager leaned back in his chair. "I told him yes, that you never talk about it, that you just come in, do your job, and go home." I smiled. He shook his head in disbelief. He sounded shaken. "He was," I said quietly. My manager slid the receipt back to me. "This is yours, all of it." "I know." "But I think this was more than a tip," he added. "Yes, it was tuition." When I walked home that night, the city felt different. Not because anything had changed, but because I remembered something important. People don't reveal who you are. They reveal who they are. And sometimes, if you stay calm long enough, they end up teaching themselves a lesson you never had to force. I reached my apartment, took off my jacket, and placed the folded receipt on the kitchen table, right beside my late wife Margaret's photo. "Still teaching," I whispered to her gently, and for the first time since she passed, I felt like myself again.
3 nights passed. I thought that dinner would fade into memory like most strange encounters do. A story to tell Luis, a quiet lesson to keep to myself. But life, I've learned, has a way of circling back when you least expect it. It was close to closing time, only 2 tables left. The lights dimmed slightly, the soft jazz playing low through the speakers, the smell of roasted garlic still hanging in the air. I was polishing cutlery when the front door opened. I didn't look up at first. "Sorry, we're about to close," Luis began. Then he stopped mid-sentence. I glanced toward the door. It was him. But he didn't look like the man from 3 nights ago.
No sharp suit, no confident posture, no superiority in his walk. Just a plain shirt, tired eyes, and something heavy sitting on his shoulders. He stepped inside slowly, like a student entering a principal's office. "Is Walter here?" he asked quietly. Luis looked at me. I put the fork down. "I'm here." He swallowed hard when our eyes met. "I was hoping you were." I nodded toward a corner table. "We're closing, but you can sit for a few minutes." He didn't sit like a customer. He sat like someone about to confess. "I haven't stopped thinking about that night," he said. I didn't respond. Silence makes people speak more honestly. "My wife hasn't either," she added. "She hasn't looked at me the same since." I folded my hands on the table. "Why are you here?" I asked gently. He took a deep breath. "I was raised to believe success meant never ending up where you were." I raised an eyebrow slightly. "And where was that?" "Working at my age, serving people half your age." I nodded slowly. "And now?" He looked down at his hands. Now I realized I confused dignity with status. That was the first honest thing he had said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "I run a private investment firm," he said. "We fund education programs, scholarships, mentorship projects." He slid the card toward me. "I want you to come speak to our interns." I almost smiled. "About wine?" He shook his head. "About humility, about presence, about what real intelligence looks like." I leaned back slightly. "You think they'll listen?" "I think they need to." For a moment I studied his face. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something much rarer. Understanding earned the hard way. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "I know. That's why I'm here." We sat quietly for a few seconds. Then he said something I didn't expect. "My father is in a nursing home." I looked at him carefully. "I haven't visited him in 8 months," he continued. "After that night, I went to see him." My chest tightened slightly. The man said, "He asked me why I looked so sad, and I couldn't explain it without admitting what I had become." I nodded. Life teaches in circles. He cleared his throat. I apologized to him. That mattered more than anything he could have said to me. "Good," I said softly. He stood up. "So will you think about it?" "I will." He extended his hand, this time not as a formality, as respect. I shook it, firmly. When he walked out, Luis rushed over. "What was that about?" I smiled faintly. "Delayed learning." Luis laughed. "You're full of those, Walter." I returned to polishing the last fork, but inside I felt something settle. That night hadn't just changed him. It had traveled further, to a father in a nursing home, to a marriage, soon to a room full of young minds. And all because I didn't react, didn't argue, didn't try to prove anything. Sometimes the strongest lesson is simply letting someone see themselves clearly, and trusting that truth will do the rest. A week later, I stood in a glass building downtown, looking out over a city that never once noticed me. Young men and women filled the room behind me. Sharp suits, bright eyes, fast minds, the kind of people the world calls the future. I could hear them whispering. "Who is he? Is he some investor? Why is he dressed like that?" I smiled to myself, because I already knew what they were thinking, the same thing that man thought in the restaurant. Then he stepped to the front and introduced me. "This," he said, "is Walter, and today you're going to hear something more valuable than any market strategy we've ever taught here." I walked slowly to the center. No stage lights, no presentation, no notes, just me. "I'm 68 years old," I began, "and I serve food in a restaurant." A few polite smiles appeared. a few confused looks. I continued. I raised a son, buried a wife, lost a home, started over, and learned something most people your age are in too much of a hurry to understand. Now they were listening. Intelligence is loud, wisdom is quiet, and dignity doesn't care who's watching. You could have heard a pin drop. I told them about the night in the restaurant, not to shame the man, but to show them a mirror. I told them how easy it is to measure people by clothes, jobs, age, and how dangerous that habit becomes when it turns into arrogance. I told them how silence can be stronger than pride, how patience can outlast cruelty, how a person can lose everything and still not lose themselves. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They just sat there, thinking, and that was better than applause. Afterwards, dozens of them came to shake my hand, not because I was important, but because for the first time they understood what importance really looks like. As I stepped outside the building, the man walked beside me. "You changed the room," he said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I just reminded them of something they already knew but had forgotten." That evening, I returned to the restaurant, put on my apron, tied the strings behind my back, and picked up a tray. Same job, same floor, same slow steps. But something had changed. Not in me, in the way the world met me. Lewis winked as I passed by. "Famous now, Walter?" I chuckled. "No, son, just understood." Later that night, I served a table of young people laughing loudly, dressed sharply, talking about investments and success. One of them looked up at me and said kindly, "Thank you, sir." Not waiter, not hey you, sir. And that was enough. Because in the end, life doesn't reward you with applause. It rewards you with moments. Moments where respect returns. Moments where dignity is seen. Moments where you realize you were never invisible. You were simply waiting for the world to slow down enough to see you. And I smiled all the way home. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like Walter's remind us that growing older does not mean becoming invisible. Share in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful story.